A couple of years ago, one of my players, Magnús, asked me if he could run a campaign set in the ancient history of my setting, during the dawn of human civilization. That's a major victory as a DM, right? Not only do I get to play, but you like my world enough that you want to expand on it? The idea had come about because we had just kickstarted this book, Odyssey of the Dragonlords, together, literally splitting the cost if I remember right. And we were excited because we saw the writers and designers were game design veterans from Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 and Knights of the Old Republic and Dragon Age Origins. So, yeah, we backed it. I want to tell you about that campaign, how we integrated it into my world, and how you can get your players to run adventures in your setting for you. Building a setting together with your playgroup with rotating DMs, each building out their own little hub. Welcome to Mystic Arts. My name is Daði. I'm a professional writer and director, and I've been DMing for over 10 years. I'm a huge fan of this book. I've talked about it plenty of times on this channel. Odyssey of the Dragonlords.
Odyssey.
When I saw they were remastering it for 2024 D&D, I emailed them and asked if they would like to sponsor a video so I had an excuse to talk about it, and they said yes. So I never thought I'd get to say this, but this video is sponsored by Odyssey of the Dragonlords. Their remaster Kickstarter is live right now, and I'll put a link in the description. So Magnús and I were running the seafaring campaign we called Perfect Storm. It was about elementals and pirates and the ever-encroaching Atroxian colonial foreign policy. You know, the good stuff. And we were co-DMing. So we'd literally prep together and then play the NPCs together and sort of author different parts of the adventure together. Like, I'd run the stuff on the ships and the island hopping, and he'd run the A-plot. And then when the B-plot became the A-plot, I became the main DM and he was the B-plot DM. I should do a video on co-DMing at some point. Over the course of running that adventure, we decided that the next game we'd run would be Odyssey of the Dragonlords, and we wanted to set it in the past. So we started seeding all kinds of adventure hooks. While island hopping in Perfect Storm, they stumbled on the Tower of Praxis from Odyssey. Or in my main game Kingmaker, the warlock learned that her patron wasn't Tasha, but was actually a dead god called Lutheria, slain by the chosen heroes during the unraveling of prophecy. And when the players tried to look into these things, I'd explain that much of the history from that time is lost after the great library of Mitros burned down a few decades after the events, because I didn't want to spoil anything. When we started crunching at Midgar Games on Echoes of the End, Magnús and I stopped co-DMing. We just didn't have the time to sync our schedules anymore. Perfect Storm sort of collapsed, and Magnús had to take over to DM the last 10 or so sessions, largely by himself, and I had to tell him I didn't have the time to run Odyssey anymore. So, I got to play. But then how could we build out the logic of the world and the story without me, the creator of the world, knowing everything? Well, he sort of interrogated me. Magnús knew I didn't want to get spoiled more than I already had, since I knew a couple of things going in, having read little bits of the book. So he'd ask me vague questions as he was preparing to run the adventure, like, do you know the origins of orcs in Orison? And I'd have to shrug and say, I know they're descended from titans or giants, but that's about it. So he'd follow up by saying, do you have any plans to develop it further? I'd say no, and that was it. Sometimes he'd even ask, can I? And then weeks or months went by and suddenly we meet orcs in the unlikeliest places and realize that this is where orcs come from. We talked about all kinds of things, whether it's the origins of titans in Orison, since the adventure featured titans and I already had some lore on titans. We would just sit down and talk it through. He asked me questions about what is being a god. Do you know what the source of divinity is? And I'd say, no, not really. And he'd go, all right then. Do you mind if I know? No. I tell him what I knew. I tell him the thought that I had going into creating the gods, how I thought about divinity, how I think that basically there are creatures in Orison that are supernal, as in their default stat block isn't commoner, their default stat block is ancient dragon or something like that, and they are therefore very powerful and probably more likely to ascend. But anybody could ascend given the right resources. And he'd say, do you know what they are? And I'd say no. And he'd say, do you mind if I? And I'd say, no, go ahead. So I would sort of hand him things to go make stuff with. Since I didn't have all the answers, it became his job to figure out what bits I was okay with him creating the answers for. We talked a lot about Sidon, the main BBG of Odyssey of the Dragonlords, and we were trying to figure out how he fits into all of this. And in those instances, I just trusted him to do what he wanted based on the stuff we had talked about. As long as he was excited about my answers of the world, I could trust that he would figure out how to do it in a way that worked with the adventure. All this led to him building a sort of new campaign setting in my campaign settings past, which made me feel like I was playing in his setting, not mine. Except he felt like he was running in my setting, and the players thought that we must have been in cahoots, but we were just making stuff up and having fun. He'd use the book and run the adventure in there while justifying the content to himself by finding weird lore answers to why my past is different from my future. Odyssey, for instance, comes with a backstory for where divinity comes from. So he worked that into my answer about where divinity comes from and created a bridge. Over the course of playing that adventure, I thought it was high time I figured out the ages of my settings past. I called the age that we were playing in the Age of Heroes, because he would start every campaign by saying, "Do you heroes want to play some D&D?" I then had to name the other ages, grace and war and empires and peace. And he'd have this sort of attitude when he said something around the table and people would go, "Ooh, I wonder if this is where orcs come from, or I wonder if this is how these things relate." And he would always respond, "I can't make it canon. Daði has to make it canon." So it was my job, when I was running the game, in the current era of my campaign setting, to interweave the stories from his end. I'd sort of canonize them afterwards. He'd create what was, to me, a reasonable origin story for the main god of my setting, the Mother, being related to the events of Odyssey of the Dragonlords, and people would say, "Oh, that's probably supposed to be the Mother," and he'd say, I don't know if that's true. Only Daði can make it true. But I liked the idea. It was a good fan theory that the players had around the table, me being included in one of the players. So as time goes on, I spent more and more time sort of integrating his answers from the book and from himself into my world. And when the campaign finished, I had a little cutscene at the start of my main game, Kingmaker, where in Mitros, somebody was delving into the city and they found the old library, the one that supposedly burned down. This way we could say that now that we've played the adventure, the history of what really happened is known to the players. This whole process of him saying stuff and me saying stuff, it became this awesome yes and back and forth between campaigns and game sessions. He ran sessions, I'd reference them, the players had theories, the connections to the past and the present, and he'd reference them as one of the NPCs, and we were building a campaign setting together. But not like through microscope or some sort of negotiations in session 0 or anything like that, but naturally, over time. Kind of like how comic book writers add new lore to the canon. The DM gets to add a bit, even if they're playing in my setting. What makes Odyssey feel so different is the Greek inspiration. You just don't see this to that degree anywhere, not even in the official 5e D&D setting that is meant to be, Greek inspired. Odyssey is so much more explicitly Greek while remaining its own with its own twists. We'd routinely, the players, find parallels between Greek myths that were familiar with us, but in a sort of D&D outfit. And since stories about Hercules, Amazons, and Achilles are all inherently heroic fantasy, 5e D&D is perfect for exploring it. Bit of the challenge was making sure that it would feel ancient. So Magnús at the start made sure that he didn't reference anything that we think of as being more modern inventions. For instance, there was no paper in the campaign. Everything was on tablets, either clay or stone. We were also bound by prophecy and fate, because the fates in this adventure are characters. My character was really constrained by that idea. He hated the fact that his will wasn't his own. He was a human and ended up becoming one of the founders of an empire later on that existed into the long ages of my setting. And we've known that empire existed for ages, and it was important to me that I would show why it came to be after an era of gods and dragons, supernal beings and titans and divinity and all those things, because he hated the idea that he wasn't able to make up his own free will. So the campaign of the adventure, the final battle, we called it the unraveling of prophecy. Because over the course of the adventure, our characters, the heroes, changed the way prophecy worked. We found the fates, and we fought them. We undid the loom. We took every step to make sure that we could create our own free will. There are pillars of ancient society and these sort of pre-feudal ideas about gods and heroes leading people. He'd do anything to try and make sure it felt ancient. He even set aside early on and was like, "Listen guys, there are no doors in the campaign. No doors." And then occasionally he'd say, "You open the door," and we all go, "Oh my god, they invented doors." And he said, no, it's an opening. It's a doorway. We're like, a what way? What is that? We had a great time. And that was the 2014 version. The new set is so much bigger. It's 4 books, 1,000 pages of adventure and world and character customization, like 24 subclasses, 10 species, and 8 backgrounds. It's like a whole expansion onto 5e, a level 1 to 20 grand epic campaign. And there's a new Norse-themed adventure in the new set, the Reavers of Oath and Ruin, which, let me say, as a Norse, hell yes. There's boatloads of new art with every major location, reimagined, new illustrations, new maps, new monster art, and it's all compatible with the new edition. So go check out their Kickstarter and join 1,000 other backers in backing this product, and you'll claim your place among the heroes of Thylea, like I got to do. This is our party. I played this generic-looking human fighter guy up here. I was actually a warlord, but whatever. And this guy's name is Larathon. He's basically like Achilles. He was unkillable except by his 3 fated dooms, right? Explains why he hates prophecy so much. We created this ability for him where he would always succeed death saving throws, but if he ever fought one of his fated dooms, he had vulnerability to all the damage. There is Kostas, who was the centaur barbarian. He was like the leader of the tribes to the north. Ceres, a former Dragonlord who had died in the first war, or everyone thought she died, and now she's back to get vengeance on Sidon. Oriana, who is the queen of the Amazons. Zergo, who is from like outside the mists and doesn't know our culture. Out there it's all dragons everywhere, so he was, looking forward to winning this fight and going to fight the dragons back home. Kita, a scholar, she was playing a bard, but she was also a Medusa. She had this curse, so she's got snakes in her hair. She was a teenager. I was very protective of her. I was making sure she was safe. Sparta, who's our Hercules. She's the daughter of Pythor, the god of war in this setting. And Irene the Siren. And the artist who drew this is one of our players. I'm lucky enough that I can just have one of my players draw this stuff. Obviously, because this is her drawing stuff for her campaign, the art that I'm going to show here is all hers, which explains why there's so much of art of her. She would just draw these for fun because this is what she does. And Irene is kind of a fascinating character and a good example of like letting somebody else run in your setting, because she had this tie to the ancient story of where the gods come from, or where a particular god came from in my setting, the mother. Irene worshipped this tree. It's behind her in this image here. The Thylea is the name of the tree. It's also the name of the setting. But we all thought that eventually that would become the mother, which is the main sort of monotheistic religion in Orithon. And over the course of the adventure, we sort of concluded that Irene must be a proto-angel, right? She's got the wings, she's got the halo. So we kind of learned where angels come from. And that kind of becomes her legacy even to this day in the setting, which I think is really cool. She did this sketch of when she met the mother, who was also Thylea, but was also Mitros, the Silver Queen. And she's got this silver hair. This is in heaven, when heaven gets created in the course of this campaign. It's like an epic, high-level adventure. And what's amazing about this book is the fact that they sort of write player backstories into the campaign. Basically, when you make a character, you pick a heroic path, which is like, you are something like this. And it's got this feature tied to it, and it's got these sort of backstory elements that you can play with. And you make your character, you pick one of these paths, and then the DM just runs the adventure. But over the course of the adventure, different parts of different heroic paths are activated. So you become more and more heroic by playing. Kind of like if you wrote a backstory and your DM has to integrate it. But this time it's all built into the campaign. I don't understand why more campaigns don't do this. It's a brilliant idea. It attaches the story of the players to the story of the adventure and then weaves it together effortlessly. Here's another art of Irene. God, she's good. She also did these sketches of what she thought the villains of the book looked like, which I think is just, great. Look at that. Terrifying. Here's an original sketch of the Kalei and how they all sort of stand together. You can see how tall Sparta is. Kita, the teenager. This is me with my shield. Oriana, she's got her chakram and these sort of ninja star things. Zergo, Ceres, Irene, Kostas, a Hort. Oh, look at that. That's some art of Ceres. That's really cool. Oh, there's this character in the adventure whom the DM described as just looking like a skull, and he was sort of trying to explain the plot of like where divinity comes from, but he was using analogies, and it was all about pi. You'd had to be there. This is fascinating. I don't know where this one comes from. God, that's cool. The fire and everything. Oh, wow. If you've been watching for a while, you know that kobolds are my favorite monster. But the monster I hate the most, and might also be my favorite monster, is the goatling. Apparently, I just love little guys. This horrible monstrosity is a fey creature that makes fun of you. There's a quote in the book on the bottom of the page that introduces them. It goes, "I really hate goatlings," from Condrus, and I didn't know that quote was there, but my character would say it all the time because I really hated goatlings. They're the worst. Here's how they work. I was running them recently, so I ended up sort of redesigning them for 2024 D&D, and here's my version of that. They jump on you, they pull your hair, and then they grapple you, so you have like disadvantage on attacks unless you're hitting the goblin that's pulling your hair and stuff. And while it's close to you, it throws stupid insults at you, so you have disadvantage on wisdom saving throws, which is important because all goatlings can point and laugh, which is a wisdom saving throw, deals a bit of damage, and then you have disadvantage on D20 tests. So how you use them is you have one guy go and grab the hair and pull at it and, frustrate the hell out of one player, and all the other goatlings point and go and laugh, and you just take a bunch of psychic damage. And they're especially fun if you use them as ads. I was running them in Octavia, which is my solo adventure with my girlfriend, and I just had this big archdryad with a bunch of goatlings. And the archdryad is really scary, but the goatlings are the ones that are grappling you, giving you disadvantage, so they hated the goatlings. They're really easy to hate, which makes them an excellent monster. So I just want to encourage you to create these sort of GM playhouses for your players so they can GM in your world for you. Like I did with Magnús and Odyssey in my campaign settings Ancient Past, but Magnús also did this with Freeport, which is a Green Ronin setting. He just put it into my world, and he knows it back and forth, and he would run in it, and I would have a blast. My friend Ivar also did two kinds of adventures like this. On one hand, there was a bunch of heists that he ran through the Thieves Guild, the Black Network, which was sort of an international thieves guild in Orathon. We did a bunch of heists. He also at one point asked me, do you know where crystal dragons come from in Orathon? And I'm like, I've never done anything with them. And he's like, no, I know. Do you mind if I create an origin story? And I was like, oh, that sounds awesome if I get to play. And he was like, yeah, it's great. So he ran 3 different campaigns that all sort of connected in to create the origin story of crystal dragons. And I just got to sit back and watch. I had no idea what he was doing. It was awesome. Victor also created this thing called Searcher Squadron, which is where like an evil campaign. We play basically the bad guys from Indiana Jones. We were all horrible people, and we were going around the world trying to find these artifacts or this sort of occultism stuff to try and help the enemy win the war. The enemy being our boss. And he'd use it to sort of excuse mistakes we'd made. So at one point, somebody cast Fly. We all thought it lasted for an hour, and it was crucial to the plot that it lasted an hour, so we never corrected it, which means it had to be canon that it did last an hour, and we didn't run it wrong. So we said, in the future, we're going to do it right. But there must be something with magic in Orathon that makes it so every now and again the spells are wrong. Because sometimes we get spells wrong. And he said, what if Searcher Squadron is looking for a way to do this? And you're being sent out into some dungeon somewhere to go figure out how that works. So he created this squad and created their missions and did some dungeons. And you can also do it less explicitly. Like AB wanted to run a grung shot because I love grung. I love any D&D species that's just a little guy. And she created a whole world and this plot with merfolk and grung and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, if you want, this could have been in Orathon. Like afterwards, I was like, this could have been in Orathon. This sounds like the Plane of Water to me. And she's like, what's in the Plane of Water? I'm like, I don't know, but maybe it is all that stuff you made up. She thought that was cool. The key to me is that as the owner of the world, the players, can't really run things in a setting where I'm too familiar. Like if Magnús wanted to run an adventure set in Atraxia, for me, I might have a hard time believing it. I would feel best if he ran an adventure in Freeport. It could feature Atraxians, but it would be his part of the setting. Or he could run Atraxia, but probably not for me playing in it, which he has done to great success. And vice versa, I have a hard time running Freeport, unless Magnús isn't present. Then I'm fine with it. This creates these little Thunderdomes where DMs can run their part of the story, and nobody needs to worry about stepping on anybody's toes. And that's where we'll pick it up next time. Thanks so much for watching this video. This channel is run by me and my girlfriend. And if you want to support us directly, consider joining our Patreon, where you can get bonus videos like Daði's Diaries and Game Tales for more campaign stories. If you're feeling especially generous, you might like the video, comment, share, or subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified when we release new videos. Until next time, keep studying the mystic arts.